E para abrir esse segundo dia de nosso evento, pessoalmente para mim, acredito que não poderia ter pessoa melhor a estar apresentando aqui hoje. Eu me lembro de quando eu tinha 14 anos de idade, lá em 2015, e eu tive a oportunidade de ver um vídeo de um evento do Fórum da Liberdade. E esse vídeo me marcou muito, porque lá havia uma mulher que estava falando sobre as diferenças entre a direita e a esquerda. Não apenas isso, colocava também com que essas duas opções não levam à liberdade, mas sim a caminhos, cada um à sua maneira, do autoritarismo. E é justamente Gloria Álvarez, palestrante internacional, cientista política, que foi essa mulher do vídeo que hoje eu tenho o prazer de convidar ao palco. Gloria.
Bom dia. Gracias. Thank you for being here in this Ayn Rand Con, which I think it's amazing that we can all be here sharing these ideas. And we'll start the day with the impact of ideas in life and in politics. You know, one of the things that fascinates me the most when I talk with people is when they start, let me see if this is, yes. When they start and say, no sé nada de política. I don't know anything about politics. When someone tells me that, it's fascinating. Because people nowadays confuse knowing about politics with being in tune with whatever gossip is happening with the crazy lunatics that are running this world. People think that being wise on politics means following Donald Trump and the things he says, or Bolsonaro, or Putin, or Chavez, or whatever. And for me, that's like following celebrity gossip versus enjoying movies and film. One thing is to engage in that gossip. Another thing is enjoying what politics means, what philosophy means. So let's talk about the importance and the impact of ideas in our world. I cannot see a little bit where you are, but I would love for you to raise your hand if you have ever come across with this photograph. Please raise your hand. Thank you. So the first time I saw this photograph, this is a photograph from 1993. The reporter was Kevin Carter. He was in his late 20s, early 30s when he took it in Sudan. And I was, I don't know, like 9 years old, 8 years old, something like that. And I remember looking at this photo and being in absolute shock. And I went to my dad, who was a very wise man, and I went there and I said to him, how come there was a reporter with such a lack of empathy that he just took a camera and takes this picture instead of grabbing that child and giving him or her some food? What's wrong with him? And it tormented me. It really tormented me as a kid. How come somebody would take a picture of a child that is starving to death while there's a bird waiting for him or her to die in order to eat the corpse, right? And my dad said to me, well, probably if you would take out like a drone, you know, drones didn't exist back then, but like a camera that would go up and up and up. What you would see, he said to me, is more of these kids. And so it would be impossible for one only person to save them all. And what he was trying to do with his photograph was just like portraying what was going on. That answer satisfied my curiosity, but I still was thinking, what's wrong with the world that we have photographs like this? And so I started questioning, not only from 10 years old, but, you know, through my teenage years, why is there poverty? And poverty was not something that was all the way in Sudan, Africa. No, I see it every day in Guatemala, you know, especially between indigenous people and the inequalities and the racism that is going on over there. And when I talk about inequality, I'm talking about inequality under the law, that we are not all treated the same, although we are individuals. And so I did something that I didn't know was a method to understand reality, but just by logic. Rand was not something that I knew when I was 10 or 14 or 18 years old, but I started with the why and the how and the what. What is really going on in the world to a point that you have kids starving in this way and reporters that cannot do anything in order to save them? And so it came time to graduate from high school, and I didn't know what to do with my life. I wanted to be a lawyer, but being a lawyer in Latin America is boring, right? It's not like in TV. You don't go and you go to trials and you defend people. No, being a lawyer in Latin America means a lot of paperwork, being in front of a computer, and my thing is people and communicating and ideas, right? So I ended up studying in Francisco Marroquín University. Has anyone here heard about it? Raise your hand. Yes, some of you know about it. So it's like, what would you say, libertarian Disneyland, objectivism, promised land, something like that. It's like this oasis in the world. I didn't choose it because of those reasons. I had no idea who was Hayek or Mises, let alone Ayn Rand. I chose this university, even though I hated the people who went there, because they were like the James Taggarts of Guatemala, okay? The entitled upper class that, yeah, okay, they learn about free market, and some of them, convert themselves, some of them don't, whatever. But I chose this university because they offered the career of international affairs and political science. And when I read the contents of that career, it was better than being a lawyer. So I go to this university, and they start confronting me with things like 1984 from George Orwell, right? Do you know this book? And Animal Farm. Animal Farm is fascinating because it's like communism for kids. It's the story of what happened in Soviet Union. Every animal is some part of society that didn't do their proper role in order for that society to collapse in the Bolshevik Revolution. Whoever reads Animal Farm understands that it is just so insane how Cuba and Venezuela and China and Vietnam and North Korea have gotten in the same path. If people would read this book, it would be more clear why communism doesn't work with animals. And I come from I am the best product of communism, like the Che Guevara is the best product of capitalism, because my whole existence is because communism was implemented in Hungary, when my grandfather escaped, and in Cuba, where my grandparents from the other side escaped as well. So I already knew that communism was wrong. That didn't necessarily mean that I knew that the state and the government should be limited. I still thought that if only we would have the right leader in power, the virtuous king, everything was going to be fine. So I graduate Francisco Marroquín University understanding that limited government and free markets do work, but I also believe that it was utopia for the reality of Guatemala. It's like when you say, yeah, these ideas are good, but they're not, feasible in a country like mine. So I went and studied abroad, and then I got this obsession, right? And this goes back to the story of the photograph of Kevin Carter in Sudan with the kid. I was obsessed with getting into the United Nations or the Monetary International Fund or the World Bank. And I was going to specialize in international development. And I was going to teach these people that the way to get people out of poverty is not through aid, but to trade. And I got a lot of scholarships, and I studied in Europe, and I studied in Washington, D.C. I did an internship at the Cato Institute, and all of that taught me that these guys are in big business for poverty to never end. It's a whole machinery. And then when I was in Italy, working with Senegalese immigrants, which is the same story as Mexican or Central American immigrants in the United States, I read Atlas Shrugged. And I read Atlas Shrugged because it was the only paperback book that I have a space in my huge and messy suitcase to bring to the 6 months that I was going to do in Italy. And I was like, okay, if I'm going to read at least one book, I'm going to bring this book that is like 1,200 pages. So if I finish it, I'm going to feel good with myself. And let me tell you something, I got so hooked because it has been a path from UFM to Marxist socialist universities in Europe. And then when I read Rand, I finally have these amazing arguments that go way beyond politics and economics. This woman is talking about religion and sex and human relationships and family and moochers and looters and the creators of the world. And then when I finished the book, I was like, I swear by my life and the value of it that I will never live for somebody else's dreams and I will never ask anybody to live for mine. So I was like, international development. I go back to Guatemala with master degrees and postgraduate degrees, and I didn't want to get involved in any of it. I didn't want to be part of the moochers and the looters of the world. I didn't want to work in the UN anymore. I didn't want to do anything, so I went back to radio. That was my part-time job. And because of it, years later, the video that you watch and you know, I started talking about dismantling populism through technology and spreading Rand's ideas and doing all this. But in this path, that it's been, 7, 8 years since 2014, the Zaragoza speech, it's quite frustrating because you see Latin America in this endless loop. And I think it's the same feeling that Rand had when she wrote Atlas Shrugged and she was witnessing how the United States was going to hell and how they were adopting these totalitarian ideas. And if we could revive Rand today and show her what the right wing has done when she wrote Conservatism and Obituary in Capitalism, the Unknown Ideal, she would be like, I told you guys. I told you, if you keep on this path, reason is going to be the one being lost. So I was thinking, I had this opportunity out of chance. I encountered these ideas not because I consistently and voluntarily went for these ideas. And so I thought of other young people with big ideals. This photo here is from the movie Diaries of a Motorcycle, Diarios de Motocicleta, which is the life of Ernesto Che Guevara before he became Che Guevara, before he killed any people, when he was just this young rebel teenager and, failed student from medicine. And he grabbed his motorcycle with his friend, and he went all the way through Latin America, watching exploitation, inequality under the law, moochers, looters, all the things that we despise. The thing is, nobody ever gave him Ayn Rand in the middle of the Amazonia. He never encountered the ideas of Hayek or Ludwig von Mises. I don't know about George Orwell. But the thing is, when he arrived in Guatemala and when he arrived in Mexico, who he encountered was Fidel Castro and Raúl Castro. And they were not even communists. They were opportunists. They were sick of the Batista dictatorship and they want to do something different. So I thought of that. And I thought, how come if you're a young person who is mad with the injustices and inequalities of Latin America and you don't encounter the right ideas at the right time, you can become a genocide. So I was thinking, is it chance? Is it luck? Is it always reason driving us to the things we do? Or is it also something that has to happen on the other side for us to get these ideas? This is why places like this and events like this are so important. Because if we don't make these opportunities, how do we expect young people to contrast and have these ideas in hand? And the thing is, there are terrible consequences in not understanding what is wrong with Latin America, because I understand Che Guevara's anger when he was in the motorcycle all over Latin America looking at exploitation from the indigenous people and the moochers and the looters and the oligarchs. But I found a brilliant explanation in Álvaro Vargas Llosa's book, Liberty for Latin America. And he gives 5 reasons of oppression, 5 psychological reasons of oppression that have been present in our continent since the Aztecs, since the Incas, since the Mayans. We have always had oppression. Not because the Spanish arrived here. The Spanish just took control of an already oppressive system. And he talks about corporatism, state mercantilism, privilege, wealth transfer, politicized law. Concepts that if you go to any state or private university in Latin America and you ask young people what do they mean, they have no idea. You know? Is it their fault that they have no idea? And the thing is, bad ideas have terrible consequences. I like to say that leftist, socialist, collectivist, altruist ideas are like an iceberg, right? You look at an iceberg and you can only see the tip of the iceberg. So the thing with collectivist ideas is that in the tip, they sound so sexy and so seductive and so good. You know, they are about empathy, giving to others, humanity, brotherhood, sacrifice. It's so beautiful, right? The tip of the collectivist iceberg. Now, the tip of the individualistic iceberg, it's like hard work, free market, selfishness, capitalism, private property. Sounds horrible, right? Sounds like you are this sociopath who do not care about humanity. And nobody bothers to go to the depth of that iceberg. Because if you go to the depth of the collectivist iceberg, you're gonna find 100 million people killed because of communism in half of this planet's territory. Communism has been tried in half of this planet's territory, counting China, the Soviet Union, etc., etc. 100 million people and counting, with the people in Nicaragua and Venezuela and other parts of the world. 100 million people. And still, you can wear a t-shirt of Che Guevara, not with the sign of do not, and it's okay. But you cannot wear the t-shirt of Adolf Hitler, for example. Why? So terrible ideas have terrible consequences in reality. But if people don't connect that terrible ideas have terrible consequences in reality, it's gonna be very hard to change that mindset. And you know what's even harder? That the alternative to communism is this fanaticized, alt-right-wing conservatism that is also collectivism that Rand talked about in Conservatism, an Obituary. So you are stuck in the middle of 2 bad choices. And so when I hear classical liberals or libertarians saying, well, you know, we have to support Bolsonaro and we have to support Trump and we have to support Putin because, you know, the alternative. It's like, no, dude. I don't need to choose between AIDS and cancer. I want to be healthy. Thank you. Thank you. And
when you talk about good ideas and what do they mean, you don't have to go to the less bad alternative. If you go to the United States, to the origin of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, right? It's not because the gringos are so enlightened and so different genetically from us. It just happens that it was the first time in history, the first time in history of 100,000 years that the Homo sapiens has been, evolving and moving around. For the first time in history, we wrote down that the individual was not a servant to a king, that slavery was wrong, that women were not more stupid than men. And how was this written down? With 3 rights. You have the right to your life, you have the right to your liberty, and you have the right to pursue your own happiness. Does that mean that you also have the right to not pursue your own happiness? Of course. In a free market, if you don't want to be part of the market, you want to be a socialist, you don't want to touch money, you're free to do so. In a communist country, if I want to have a free trade zone, I get killed. That's the difference. So being free means also that you are free to not engage in reality if you don't want to. And that's when Rand said, well, you can ignore reality, but you cannot ignore the consequences of ignoring reality, right? So the marvelous thing that happened in the United States for the first time in history was writing these things down. Now, don't get me wrong. These things could have been written down in China, or in Antarctica, or in Guatemala, or in Argentina, like they were in the Argentina of Alberdi. It's not the territory, it's not the genetics, it's the exceptionalism of what these words mean. And now, outright collectivism wants to say, no, the exceptionalism of the United States, it's because of its conservatism, it's because of its religion. And this is how we're going to fight the socialism of Alexandra Ocasio-Cortez and the socialism of Joe Biden with Jesus Christ. He's like, what? Seriously? And this is why I love the work of the New Ideal when they talk about national conservatism versus Americanism. And when I talk about Americanism, I'm talking about individualism, which could have happened anywhere in the world. Because in fact, we also have to remember, we come from monarchies, guys. From like all of our history, we decided that magically, by divine rights, there was going to be one family that could get all the money in the world because they were that cool family. We come from this. Do not forget. And we come from globally accepting that slavery was okay. It's only been less than 2 centuries that we have less monarchies, less slavery, and still, women are not free. I mean, look at Iran. There are women fighting just to have her hair out. So when we look at our history, we need to understand freedom, individual rights have never been the rule. They have been the exception. And when people talk to me about the marvels of the Western culture, the Western culture is full with genocide, Nazism, fascism, communism, slavery, machismo, religion and state together. If you look at the Western history, most of its history has been that. And the rebels and the motors of the world have been those exceptions saying, wait a minute, we ought to be free, we ought to be equal, we ought to be happy. And those have been marvelous exceptions. So, going back to the good or bad ideas. This picture. Thank you, perfect. This picture. You know what's the truth behind it? And this is why good ideas and bad ideas matter a lot. Kevin Carter won a Pulitzer because of this photograph. He was so depressed because, like me, the whole world is starting asking the New York Times, what happened with the little girl? Where is she? What an inhumane guy that didn't help her. And these messages tormented him until he killed himself when he was 33 years old, just like 2 years after he took the picture. Turns out that years later, somebody grabbed the story and went back to Sudan to see what really happened. Turns out that, first of all, Kong Young, that was the name of not the girl, as everybody thought, but the boy. He was not starving. He went to Sudan, to that village of Ayon, to find food from a program of the United Nations, and he already had a plastic bracelet that meant that he was going to be treated with vaccines and malnourishment treatments, and he went there with his aunts. And he was waiting to be, taken care of when the reporter, Kevin Carter, took the photograph. The boy survived the hunger, and he lived until he was 14 years old. So that's like 2003, 2002, pretty much. So when the reporter came back to Sudan, not Kevin Carter, because he had killed himself in the late 90s, but the new reporter who went in 2011, he found the boy's dad. And the boy's father said, well, actually, my boy was never in danger. He was waiting to be treated and fed. With a short-term solution, yes, of course, and we can discuss that. But the reality is, 1 or 2 lives were lost because of bad ideas and a lot of misconceptions. And a prize was given to a photograph that was not even representing reality as it was. This is how important ideas are. It's a matter of life and death and of understanding really what is going on. So whenever you see a tragic story, remember Kevin Carter, remember this photograph, and remember asking, why is it that there's poverty in this world? And make no mistake, there is still a lot of poverty in this world because there are a lot of moochers and looters that from their ignorance and their malice want to control your life. And they believe that they have better solutions for you than you will ever have. So I want to finish with this quote of Rand and pass to some questions. Ideas cannot be fought except by means of better ideas. Okay? You don't cure cancer by offering AIDS. You don't kill socialist ideas with fascist, alt-right, conservative, totalitarian, collectivist ideas. Let's understand that, please. The battle consists not of opposing, but of exposing, not of denouncing, but of disproving, not of evading, but of boldly proclaiming a full, consistent, and radical alternative. So I ask you, what is your alternative? We cannot be offering people that the alternative to Lula is Bolsonaro when we know that's not going to work. What is the alternative that you are willing to offer to the world? As crazy as it is. Look, my alternative is a whole presidential campaign that is completely illegal for Guatemala, but I don't care. I'd rather have that alternative than backing up, like I did mistakenly, the right wing of Guatemala, which are moochers and looters that are also corrupt. And I think that we cannot insist on complaining that young people love Che Guevara and love socialist ideas when we don't offer them alternatives. Consistent alternatives that really have answers. And I do believe that objectivism has a lot of those answers. So supporting the work that Maria is doing and the work that everybody here has done for this conference to exist might be one of many solutions. Thank you very much.
Seguindo a dinâmica de perguntas e respostas, conforme seguimos ontem também, quem tiver, apenas ir na parte dos microfones posicionados aqui nas laterais, que agora vai estar respondendo-as.
You can ask in Portuguese, I understand.
Olá, Gloria, ¿cómo está?
Hola.
Gloria, un gusto estar aquí, escucharte, tu charla. Antes que haga la pregunta, quería decirte que es un placer tenerte aquí y se ve más guapa que en la tele, es más brillante. Y se lo digo con todo respeto porque acá está mi esposa, así que...
Está mi novio también, no pasa nada. Saludos a los dos.
Tranquilo, estamos bien. A ver, Gloria, quería preguntar... I want to ask you a question which is quite simple. Yesterday, I was kind of nervous because I saw here people very pessimistic about how we're going to win the battle of ideas and about the battle of ideas between freedom and the collectivists. And because the universities are all taken by collectivists, people are kind of, pessimistic, which is what I observed. But I want to know from you if you think we have a path for that, and if you think the free information and the cryptocurrency are a path to take the power from the state and bring it back to us, by taking from them the money control, and also the control over information.
Thank you. No, thank you very much for that important question.
So, being pessimistic or being realistic, when I see Latin America going in this endless loop, I do get mad. I will confess, when Petro won in Colombia, there was a point when I was like, you know what? Fine, have it. You deserve it. You have your country plagued with Venezuelans that are starving and you still want socialism? Have it. Because you get so frustrated. And how many of you have read Atlas Shrugged? So, I don't do a spoiler alert. Okay, half of the auditory. The other half, just cover your ears. No, I'm kidding. But one of the fascinating things about Atlas Shrugged is the energy of the motor, right? Which is something that was never invented before. Or Reardon steel, which is something new. So the energy of the motor and Reardon steel, we are not going to win this battle doing the same thing that the system asks from us to do. Every young person that I have encountered that says to me, I'm going to go to politics, I'm going to be part of the system to change the system from within, they are the ones getting changed. The system absorbs them. And this happens even if you're a communist. Look at Camila Vallejo. She got in power in Chile, and now she's not communist anymore, right? Or Javier Milei in Argentina. People in Argentina just told me that now that he's in politics, he has toned down his aggressive ways, let's say. So the system has a way of toning down whatever rebellious thing you have to do. So I do believe that cryptocurrency is like a new energy, a new motor. But it's not the only thing that we need to do. It's not only offering new solutions that are from the outside, but it's also how we are going to have better human quality of the people doing this battle. I highly recommend you watch a HBO documentary called The Anarchists, which is the story of Anarcopulco. Anarcopulco was the gathering of the anarcho-capitalists every year about cryptocurrency. And it ended up in killings and really bad. Why? Because the human quality of the people looking to these alternatives was not in the right place. More and more,
as I do this battle, I encounter that if you don't have emotional intelligence as well as intellectual intelligence, and your heart and your soul is not in the right place, sure, you can push for crypto, you can push for limited government, but you first have to fix yourself. That's the first rule of rational selfishness. And what I encounter is that sometimes the people with the right ideas are deeply wounded. They actually adopt these ideas because they come from trauma. They come from domestic violence, they come from deceptions, they come from abuse. And if they don't solve that philosophically and deeply in the way, they cannot be rulers for others. So yes, you have to have the energy and the motor, but you also have to have the Reardens and the Franciscos and the Galts and the Dagnis that are in the right place in order to push. And I do believe that we have to do something that has never been done. You don't change the world with the same technologies that already exist, right? If Steve Jobs would have offered another writing machine, he wouldn't be a Steve Jobs, right? The thing that we need to understand is we need to be rebellious about the things we offer with these ideas. If we keep waiting for the universities to give us our place, it's not going to happen. This is what I tell women all the time. Look, if in order to empower yourself, you're waiting for every single woman in this world to be free of oppression, of religion, of domestic violence, of the burqa, it's never going to happen. Women cannot wait for every woman to be free in order for them to, grab their freedom. Because we're still centuries from that, unfortunately. So it's the same with these ideas. If you're waiting for the political parties and the universities and the colluded markets to give you your place for these ideas to advance, it's not going to happen. It's not who is going to let you, it's just that nobody can stop you if you're determined to do something that is insane enough, that it's outside of the box. Is it going to work? I have no idea. But I think it's worth trying. Thank you.
Olá, Glória.
Hola.
Você é maravilhosa.
Gracias.
Amei toda a sua fala, muito bem construída. Parabéns, parabéns. Eu tenho uma dúvida que eu acho que você é a melhor pessoa, talvez, para me trazer uma luz sobre ela. Talvez a gente não tenha respostas absolutas aqui hoje, mas como você vê que as ideias de Ayn Rand podem ser aplicadas hoje nesse cenário socioeconômico que nós temos, considerando que a maioria das pessoas no mundo, pelo menos em alguns países, ainda vivem com poucas possibilidades educacionais. Você conseguiu compreender minha pergunta? Porque, às vezes, o acesso à educação ele é muito limitado, né? Então, assim, hoje nós estamos tendo o privilégio aqui de aprender uma filosofia diferente, uma forma de ver a vida com outro ângulo. Mas o que a gente faria, por exemplo, né? Assim, eu sei que é uma pergunta até bem ampla, mas, para mim, ela precisa fazer um pouco mais de sentido para que eu possa conseguir construir, né, todo o processo desse evento aqui na minha mente. Como a gente aplicaria hoje o modelo, né, da filosofia de Ayn Rand com as pessoas que não têm esse acesso, como lá na África, nesse exemplo que você trouxe? Obrigada.
Thank you for your question. I think it's very important to understand who is your audience and how you can sell the ideas of liberty to your audience. More and more, I've been studying about trauma. I've been reading a fascinating book called The Body Keeps the Score, and it's about how physical diseases have to do with whatever mental trauma you haven't solved in your life. And I've been asking myself, since I started on radio and I was dealing with young people in Guatemala who are deeply wounded in their self-esteem because since they are little kids, the family beats them up, they are forced to work, they are told that, they are victims of a system that they will never change. And then I thought, how can you sell freedom to people that are too scared to be free? Like, yeah, you can be selling free market and freedom, but if you are dealing with a level of trauma and blockage and poverty, it's going to be very hard. So you have to look who is your audience. Because you don't sell the same bottle of shampoo to different types of hair. You don't sell the bottle of freedom, one size fits all, you know? There are people that resonate better with Yaron Brook. There are people who resonate better with Jordan Peterson. There are people who resonate better with Rand. And you cannot be obsessed with whatever you want to communicate. You have to understand who is your audience. It's not the same selling freedom to indigenous women that are suffering domestic violence that to, you know, businessmen that their issue is, should I support the right-wing candidate or not? So you have to understand your audience, and the first thing I understood about education and young people is to cut the idea that the government needs to educate you. Education is scarce if you think that it has to be given to you by the government who is interested in not educating you. But if you cut that idea and you say to people, look, with your cell phone, with internet, you can educate yourself. You have access to any idea that you want. And if you change that and you put them as the main characters of their own existence, then you empower them. But then it's up to them. Then maybe it's not going to be a system of education like we are used to in university or in high school. That means that if you are the motor of your own education, you can go to a master class, you can go to YouTube, you can go to the OAC, you can go to the Ayn Rand Center Latin America, and you are the main character of it. Empowering people and giving them the alternatives. That's what I started doing in Guatemala with scholarships. I said to young people, listen, you have two options. Either you stay ignorant, because that's how the government wants you, the poorer you are, the more they gain, or you start looking for alternatives through the internet. Did I get mocked? Yes. This was 2010. Most Guatemalans didn't think that we were going to have internet nationwide. That we now have. And so, yes, I got mocked, but I was like, well, that's the alternative. Either you take your own education, and that's the thing. I mean, we are the ones with the idea that you are the owner of your life, so let's start communicating that to people. Let's not assume that because a single mom, 22 years old, with 3 jobs and 4 kids, oh, she's not going to care about this. Who are you to say that she's not going to care about this? Sometimes millionaire kids who have all the time in the world, they don't care about these things. And poor people do. And that's the fascinating thing about ideas. It's not, when you sell ideas, it's not a product for a niche. I cannot say, oh, ideas are for 15 to 18-year-old people, upper middle class that live in cities. No. Maybe a 65-year-old indigenous man in the Amazonia is going to care about this. And I don't know. That's the fascinating thing about ideas. You don't know what's going to light where. So you have to spread them, and you have to try. But I think that the first advice is observe your audience. What is worrying your audience? What aches them? What are the problems that they have? And speak through that. Because nobody is going to take liberty if they don't find some usefulness in it, in their lives. And I think that's why there are a lot of life coaches now. Because religion is proving that it's not giving answers. So people are turning to yoga, to Jordan Peterson, to Esther Perel, to the life coach that tells them how to get out of narcissistic and toxic relationships. People are looking for answers. So try to give them those answers, not from a statistics of free market and, you know, economic growth. That can speak to some audience, but it's not going to speak to everybody.
Olá, Gloria. Por que você acha que ainda há tantos defensores da liberdade que entre esquerda e direita se veem obrigados a defender quem quer que esteja na direita, seja Trump, seja Bolsonaro, simplesmente por serem contra a esquerda, sendo que Rand Nos anos 60, já tinha escrito um obituário para o conservadorismo e, no final da vida, ela era uma crítica severa de Reagan. Mas, até hoje, 40 anos depois, liberais acham que nós devemos ser sempre à direita, independente do que realmente o direitista defende. O que você poderia dizer para essas pessoas? Assim, qual explicação você poderia dar do fato de que gente como Trump e Bolsonaro realmente não defendem a liberdade? Obrigado.
Gracias. Thank you. That's a really important question. I think it's because Rand was an atheist. And so if you have to have her as the motor to change, it's like, no, she's a woman and an atheist, and she has these crazy ideas about sex and individualism and empowerment. Like, Austrian economics, right, flirts very good with a right-wing religious conservatism, right? Like, they go hand in hand. It's easier. And they can, you know, wash their faces with dictatorships like Pinochet, and it's okay. And then when systems like that fail, because they only focus on economic growth, like they were saying yesterday, it's not only about low taxes and limited government, it's understanding philosophically profoundly why the individual is born to be free. And they might not necessarily understand that. So imagine a world where you have Rand, who first of all, she's harsh, she's not easy to look at, she's a woman. And you have all these Austrian economists, right, trying to do something in the short term. So I think that there are many answers to your question, but basically two of them are that Rand comes from the deep philosophical questioning of reality and what reality is, and that was uncomfortable for religious, conservative, free market fans, and also because people love short-term solutions. And it's a short-term solution. How many times have we heard, well, you know what, it's just for the elections. I'm sick of that. Every time that a business group invites me to Bolivia, Mexico, Ecuador, Guatemala, when people say to me, oh my God, you're so brilliant because you understand our reality, it's not that hard, guys. It's the same reality everywhere in Latin America, you know? And once you see it once, twice, 3 times, you can see it everywhere. And I am so tired of going to a meeting with businessmen because I believe that we are like we are, not because of our poor masses. We are like we are because the mediocrity of our elites, intellectual, business, artists, and everything. Thank you. Thank you. And when they invite me, these businessmen, it's always 2 months before elections. You know, it used to happen, always, especially before I wrote the book about conservatism. So they would invite me, and they would be like, Gloria, what do we do? And I'm like, well, you have to educate generationally about these ideas. This means that you have to put your money where your mouth is, because if you want leaders in TV, in radio, in newspapers talking about these ideas, you better finance them. Because otherwise, the Catholic Church, the Evangelical Church, the Foro of Sao Paulo is going to grab them. Haven't you seen liberty leaders becoming more alt-right in the extreme, or super Marxist? That's because there's money behind that. I have the blessing or the privilege or the whatever you want to call it, that I have a businessman like Ricardo Salinas who is into cryptocurrency and legalizing drugs and classical liberalism giving me a job. But if I don't have a job and I need to eat and I need to work and there comes Vox or Putin or George Soros and he's going to give me money, well, heck, I'll take it, right? So when I talk about this with businessmen in Latin America and I say to them,
if you want private property to be defended, you need the intellectual leaders that are going to go into the massive communication to defend that. And if you don't put your money where your mouth is, who's going to do it? Artists are not going to do it. Churches are not going to do it. And when I talk to them about this, they're like, yeah, but we'll do that later. What do we do now that we have elections in 2 months and we have this shitty option or this other more shitty option? And I'm like, if you want to force me to tell you into choosing between 2 things that I know that in 4 years are going to be completely wrong, no, I'm not going to be extorted that way. And they don't like that answer. They like inviting you, they like you talking about it, but when you truly tell them what needs to be done in the long term, they don't like it. So you have businessmen desperate with Guillermo Lasso in Ecuador, with Macri in Argentina, with Bolsonaro in Brazil, with Yamatei in Guatemala, and it's a failed system. That's why Petro is right now in Colombia. That's why Lula is really close to winning after all the corruption. So what could we do? Divide the businessmen and the intellectuals and the professors and the artists who do not care about the short term and that maybe can come with an economic solution for all of them to subsidize their existence in order to push for a really liberty agenda. And maybe that means that we're not going to be able to save the world. And we're not going to be able to save Brazil. And we're not going to be able to save Argentina. And we're not going to be able to save Mexico. But new solutions require crazy ideas. So what about, I don't know, but what about getting together the few people in every country that really believe in these ideas, and let's ask the United Nations or the OAS or whoever we would need to ask and say, listen, it is evident that Latin America is going to be in this endless pendulum from shitty left to shitty right, and we're sick of it. And we understand that we're not going to be able to save one country, but we are the free people of all of Latin America, and we want to live in one territory. We want to buy that territory. We want to build it like the Dubai Island. I don't know. I'm not saying that this is the solution, but what I'm saying is let's start thinking in different ways. Because otherwise, I don't see. And that's what the markets do. They offer you products that didn't exist before. And I think that we are in a moment that we desperately need new products to sell these ideas. So thank you very much for being here. I hope you enjoy it.